Hello everyone, this is Creepy Applause, and welcome to CampFire Horror Stories. This one was told to me by a friend the night before I was to babysit alone for the first time. This girl was babysitting one night, the parents were out on a date night, the baby was in bed, and she started hearing something from the basement. So she went down the stairs and looked in the window and saw a man standing outside with a bloody knife. She ran upstairs as quickly as she could, grabbed the baby and ran to the neighbour's house and called the police. Later that night, when talking with the police, she was telling them of the man she saw in the basement window. The mother overheard her story and said there are no windows in the basement, only mirrors. To this day, I hate babysitting alone. I heard that when I was 14. I am now 21 and it still gives me the heebies. I went to Girl Scout camp every summer until I was 12 or 13. Every year, older girls would tell me the story of the Girl Scout murders. It usually went some crazy person dragged 2 or 3 girls out of their tents in the middle of the night and brutally murdered them. They weren't found until the next morning, and they had never caught who did it. That story used to scare the shit out of me. One day I was browsing some unsolved mysteries and came across the Girl Scout murders. Turns out that the story was fucking true. There was once, in a field camp in the middle of the jungles at nightfall, doing a head count as we hiked through the forest. You know, the one where you start from the back of a single file, and if you hear the person behind you, you shout. You shout the next number. We had 20 people in our detail. We counted 21. We counted again, 21. And again, 21. We stopped counting and pretended nothing happened. We did another head count at our next checkpoint, and it was 20. I have serious doubts about this, but it's still super creepy. One of my friends in college dated a guy who knew a deputy sheriff. The story goes that the deputy was dispatched to an accident one night that occurred just seconds away from where he was. When he got there, he found that one of the drivers had been decapitated. As he looked at the severed head, the lips started moving and it spoke to him for a few seconds before becoming lifeless. Take it however you want, but that story kept me up for a week. Heard this from a friend. I don't know how true it is, but it gives me shivers to this day. His aunt come home from grocery shopping one day and was putting the food in the fridge when she heard the washing machine start. Knowing she hadn't started the machine, but hesitant nonetheless, she walked to the basement door and put her hand on the knob. Something felt seriously wrong. She called 911 and the police rolled up to the house and entered and headed down to the basement. Minutes later, they returned with a man in handcuffs who had been waiting with a knife. This story is probably the only reason I can still justify checking behind the shower curtain when I'm home alone. I was head counselor and organizer one year for a leadership development camp. We had a meeting a few months before the actual camp, and the sponsors and adults told us not to mention cabin 1. Essentially, 2 6-year-old girls were murdered in that cabin. It wasn't because it wasn't true, it was because they didn't want us to scare anyone, so naturally I tell it anyway to shut my cabin up. My grandpa used to tell me a story every time we went camping about this thing called the hill crawler. Basically, it was a human creature thing that had one normal sized leg and then one super long crooked leg, so it could walk around the circumference of hills with no struggle, almost in a split like position. I didn't think much of it as a kid, but now that I'm older, it kinda scares the shit out of me. I'm a scout leader in Australia. I've started telling a shortened version of this Goatman story around the campfire. Mysterious noises reported by one scout when they go away from the campfire to the toilet. an extra body showing up in the frequent head counts, and a shadowy figure seen by me and other scout leaders slowly moving amongst the sleeping scouts around the fire. Surprisingly, I haven't given them nightmares yet. Hidden on a back road, Camp Connecticut is a derelict summer camp with a dark history. Before the area was a camp, a poverty-stricken family lived in the woods, driven insane with hunger and thirst. The man killed his daughter and wife before hanging himself from a tree. When the area was developed into a camp hundreds of years later, a camp counselor went crazy, killing 60 children and 4 other counselors by locking them in their cabins and setting them on fire before drowning herself. The counselor scratched the hanging man told me into a tree stump near the lake. People believe the guilt-ridden ghost of the man haunts the empty camp, with people hearing hysterical laughter in the woods in the dead of night. In 1876, a 10-year-old boy bludgeoned his mother and father to death whilst they slept after his mother had told him she was going to have a baby. When the housemaid found the boy sitting in his parents' blood the next day, he told her that someone had come into the house in the middle of the night and murdered his parents whilst he hid under his own bed. No one knows what happened to the boy after this, but the campsite now sits on the land his parents used to own. Campers and hikers who stay at the site have said they sometimes hear a child's laughter. Others have seen the ghost of the mother and father he murdered drifting through the woods holding hands. In 1692, a 13-year-old girl was abandoned in the woods just outside of Salem, Massachusetts by her father, who suspected her of being a witch. After hearing rumors that his daughter had been terrorizing townspeople, the girl's father led a mob into the woods to find her and kill her. The girl escaped the fire but was met with a group of angry men who began chasing her deeper into the woods. When the girl fell into a deep ditch, she called to her father for help, and as she reached up to her father, he started to shovel dirt over her. Now people who visit the woods think they can hear the muffled, agonizing screams of the girl who was buried alive. As the weather gets warmer, I usually find myself spending more evenings out on the porch, relaxing with a glass of red wine, gazing at the wooded area across the street from my house. A couple of weeks ago, I sat on my porch as usual, whistling a tune that had been stuck in my head all day. My neighbour from her own porch turned to me and said, "You shouldn't be whistling at night. The dead will think you are calling for them." I laughed. "They are closer than you think," she said. I suddenly felt the urge to go back inside. The woods started to look a little too dark, concealing what almost looked like blurry shapes that swayed behind the trees. I don't whistle at night anymore, but they do. My wife was shaking me quietly. I looked around the cabin. The girls must have gone to bed. The fire had burned down to embers. My glass of scotch was still in my hand. Something is tapping on the porch. Then I heard it too. I grabbed my axe and lit the lantern. I opened the door expecting a raccoon or a skunk, but instead found a boy, about 10 years old. He stared at me petrified for a moment, then bolted down the path through the woods. I gave a chase. He was losing me, but I heard him tumble to the ground. I leaped on top of him in rage. "Why were you knocking on my porch?" I screamed. "My uncle told me to," he stammered. I was no longer angry but confused. "But why?" I asked. "To get you out of the cabin." I grew up in New Mexico and was always very into outdoors, hiking, camping, rock climbing, etc. One summer when I was 19, I went on a 4-day/3-night camping trip near my parents' house on my own. Might sound weird, but I had been to this area many times and it was quite safe. Anyway, I brought my camera and took lots of pictures. When I came back and developed my film, there was 3 extra pictures that I didn't take of me sleeping, 1 each night. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit like and subscribe for more content.